The Talori Confederacy had ruled the stars for centuries. Their massive ships glided through space like silent predators, their technology unmatched across 17 star systems. They were not cruel masters, but they were firm ones. New species were expected to bow, to serve, to recognize the natural order of things. Senior strategist Pak stood before the curved window of the command vessel, hands clasped behind his back as he watched the holographic display of an unremarkable yellow star and its 8 planets. His attention focused on the third one from the sun, a blue-green marble that intelligence reports claimed housed a species called humans. "They've barely left their own moon," Pak said, his voice carrying the bored confidence of someone who had overseen dozens of first contact scenarios. "Their communications are chaotic, disorganized, no unified government. They still fight among themselves over resources that are abundant elsewhere in their system." Behind him, seated at a small console, xenobiologist Kim scrolled through data collected from intercepted transmissions, his brow furrowed as he studied unusual patterns. "With respect, senior strategist, there's something different about these humans," Kim said. He pulled up comparison charts showing adaptation rates across known species. "Look at their historical development curve. They went from primitive flight to space travel in less than 100 years. That's unprecedented." Pak waved away the concern. "Speed of development doesn't equal military capability. Their most advanced weapons would barely scratch our scout ships." "It's not just their technology," Kim persisted, pulling up biological scans. "Their stress responses are unique. When threatened, most species show decreased cognitive function. Humans show the opposite. They become more focused, more innovative under pressure." The conversation was interrupted as a junior officer entered, bowing low. "The High Council is assembled for your assessment, senior strategist." Pak straightened his uniform and gave Kim a dismissive glance. "Save your concerns for your research papers, xenobiologist. The Council doesn't require theories about human stress responses. They require action plans." In the council chamber, 12 Talori elders sat in a semicircle on elevated platforms. Their scaled skin reflected the soft blue lighting, giving them an almost mythical appearance. Pak stood in the center, projecting confidence as he outlined his recommendation. "The human world occupies valuable cosmic real estate," he explained, showing resource charts of the solar system. "Their asteroid belt alone contains mineral wealth that could fuel our expansion for generations. Their planet's biodiversity would provide valuable research specimens." Elder Yoon, the head counselor, leaned forward. "And the humans themselves? Like all species, they will resist initially, then accept reality," Pak replied smoothly. "I recommend a standard disciplinary action. We neutralize their military installations from orbit as a demonstration of power. Once they understand resistance is futile, we establish a provisional government." Kim, standing off to the side as the scientific advisor, cleared his throat. "I feel compelled to register concern about this approach. Our intelligence suggests humans react unusually to threats. They unite quickly against outside forces." Elder Jin, known for his caution, nodded slowly. "Perhaps we should send diplomatic envoys first, learn more about them?" Pak's expression hardened. "Diplomatic approaches signal weakness. The Talori Confederacy didn't become the dominant power in this sector by asking permission. Besides, looking at their communications, they can barely maintain peace among themselves. They're divided by something called nations, artificial boundaries on their own planet. They'll fracture under pressure, not unite." The council members exchanged glances, their confidence buoyed by centuries of successful conquests. One by one, they voted in favor of Pak's plan. Only Elder Jin abstained, looking troubled. As the meeting concluded, Kim approached Pak in the corridor outside. "Senior strategist, please reconsider. There are unusual patterns in human behavior that suggest you're overly cautious," Pak interrupted. "Your job is to study them after we've established control, not to question military strategy." 3 days later, the invasion fleet assembled at the edge of the solar system. 20 warships, each capable of destroying a small moon. Pak watched, From the command bridge as final preparations were made. "We'll begin with their orbital platforms," he instructed. "Clean shots, minimal debris that might damage the planet. Then we target military installations on each continent simultaneously." The fleet commander, a veteran named Sung, nodded. "Our scans show primitive defense satellites, nothing that can detect us until we want to be seen." "Perfect," Pak smiled. "Record everything. This will make an excellent addition to the Academy's teaching materials on efficient subjugation." As the fleet moved into position, Kim sat alone in his research lab, reviewing the data one more time. Something in the human transmissions troubled him, their stories, their entertainment broadcasts. Unlike other species who created tales of harmony and cooperation, humans seemed obsessed with conflict, with overcoming impossible odds. Their heroes weren't the strongest or most intelligent, but the most determined, the ones who refused to accept defeat. He drafted one final message to the High Council, knowing it was too late to stop the attack, but feeling compelled to record. His warning: the humans have a concept they call backs against the wall. When most species feel trapped, they surrender. When humans feel trapped, they fight harder. I fear we are not preparing to subjugate a species. We are about to awaken one. The message sent, Kim watched on his monitor as the first Talori ships entered Earth's detection range, weapons charging. He whispered to himself, "And so it begins." The first strike came without warning. Talori warships emerged from behind Earth's moon, their massive hulls reflecting sunlight as they approached. Within minutes, 3 space stations and 14 military satellites vanished in silent flashes of light. Commander Lee stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching with clinical detachment as the humans' primitive detection systems finally registered the attack. "Enemy communications show confusion and panic," reported a junior officer. "Their military bases are scrambling aircraft, primitive combustion engines with projectile weapons." Lee nodded, satisfied. "As expected. Proceed with Phase 2. Neutralize their primary defense installations." Targeted beams lanced down through Earth's atmosphere, striking military bases across North America, Asia, and Europe simultaneously. The Talori crew watched impassively as mushroom clouds rose from the impact sites. "Send the standard message of surrender," Lee ordered. "Inform them further resistance will result in civilian casualties." The message was broadcast on all human communication frequencies translated into 12 major Earth languages. Lee allowed himself a small smile. This was proceeding exactly as senior strategist Pak had predicted. Another routine subjugation. Another species to join the Confederacy. 6 hours later, that smile had vanished. "What do you mean they shot down a cruiser?" Lee demanded, staring at the battle report in disbelief. "Their weapons are centuries behind." "Ours," the tactical officer swallowed nervously. They used their own aircraft as weapons, Commander. Loaded them with explosives and flew them directly into our shield generators. Once the shields were compromised, they fired nuclear missiles, crude but effective when shields are down." "Suicide? Attacks?" Lee's voice was incredulous. "That's irrational. No species sacrifices themselves when defeat is inevitable." On the view screen, footage showed the burning wreckage of the Talori cruiser Invincible falling through Earth's atmosphere, breaking apart as it descended. "That's not all, Commander," the communications officer added. "We're detecting unusual diplomatic activity. Nations that were hostile to each other hours ago are now coordinating their responses. Something called an Emergency Defense Coalition has formed." Lee's disbelief grew as reports continued flowing in. Human pilots were flying directly into the paths of Talori energy beams to determine their recharge rates. Civilian boats were ramming Talori landing craft. In one region, humans had detonated their own dams to flood valleys where Talori ground. Forces had landed. "Get me xenobiologist Kim," Lee ordered. Kim appeared on screen minutes later, his expression grave but unsurprised. "You told the council this would happen," Lee admitted. "Explain what we're seeing." Kim nodded. "Throughout their history, humans have been shaped by conflict. Their planet is unusually hostile. Extreme weather, predators, diseases. They evolved not by being the strongest species, but by refusing to die when logic said they should. Their entire biology is designed to function better under threat. But sacrificing themselves? Lee gestured to footage of human fighters deliberately crashing into Talori ships. That defies evolutionary logic. Not for them, Kim replied. Humans have a concept called heroism. They celebrate those who sacrifice themselves for the group. What we see as irrational, they see as the height of virtue. And there's something else. The screen shifted to show human manufacturing centers, where civilian vehicles were being rapidly converted into makeshift tanks and aircraft. Their industrial capacity is remarkable, Kim continued. They're already adapting, using what they've learned from our first attacks to modify their weapons. Those aren't military factories. Those are converted automobile plants. Lee felt a cold sensation spreading through his body, fear, an emotion few Talori military leaders ever experienced. The ground forces report humans continuing to fight, despite injuries that would incapacitate any rational being, he said quietly. One human soldier continued attacking after losing a limb. Adrenaline, Kim explained, a hormone that allows them to temporarily override pain and fatigue. In their natural history, it let them fight predators even when wounded. Now it's being turned against us. 3 days later, the situation had deteriorated further. Talori landing parties were meeting fierce resistance everywhere. Human scientists had already captured enough Talori technology to begin crude reverse engineering efforts. Most alarming of all, humans were broadcasting messages to the stars. Somehow they'd figured out the Talori communication frequencies and were sending messages to other species in the Confederacy, describing Talori atrocities and offering alliances. In his private quarters, Lee reviewed the casualty reports with growing horror. The invasion force had lost 18% of its strength against a species that had barely begun space travel. This was unprecedented in Talori military history. His communication panel chimed. It was Senior Strategist Pak, his usual confident expression replaced by barely controlled panic. The High Council demands answers, Commander. How have these primitives managed to inflict such damage? Lee took a deep breath. They don't behave like any species we've encountered. When we destroy their cities, instead of surrendering, the survivors become more determined. They're turning everything into weapons, civilian vehicles, commercial aircraft. Even their entertainment technologies are being repurposed to disrupt our communications. That's impossible, Pak hissed. Their technological level was assessed as pre-interstellar. Assessment was correct, but incomplete, Lee replied. They're not advanced, but they're adaptable, relentless. One of our captured officers reports being interrogated by humans who had just watched their families die in our attacks. They weren't seeking revenge. They were methodically extracting information about our shield frequencies. A warning alarm blared through the ship. Lee's eyes widened as the tactical display updated. I must go, he said urgently. The humans have launched a coordinated attack on our orbital positions. The view screen showed waves of hastily modified Earth spacecraft, some still bearing civilian logos, approaching Talori positions. Mixed among them were missiles, drones, and what appeared to be converted satellites now serving as kinetic weapons. They're using their own space debris as weapons, whispered a tactical officer in disbelief. As Lee watched the approaching swarm, he remembered Kim's warning from weeks earlier. The xenobiologist had tried to tell them all. Humans didn't think like other species. They didn't calculate odds of success. When threatened, when cornered, they didn't surrender. They innovated. They sacrificed. They fought with a desperation that made them dangerous beyond their technological capabilities. All ships evasive maneuvers, Lee ordered, knowing it was too late. The humans had found a weakness in Talori tactical doctrine, and they were exploiting it ruthlessly. As explosions bloomed across his fleet, Lee had one clear thought. This wasn't going to be a subjugation. It was becoming a war. And the Talori, despite all their technological advantages, were no longer certain of victory. 3 months after the first Talori ships appeared in Earth's skies, the war had transformed human civilization. Underground, bunkers that once housed government officials now served as laboratories where scientists worked around the clock, surrounded by salvaged alien technology. In one such facility, buried beneath what had once been farmland, engineer Hans stared, in disbelief at the data on his screen. "This can't be right," he muttered, running the simulation again. "Check my figures." His assistant, a former university professor, leaned over to review the calculations. "The numbers are correct. They've improved our propulsion design by 38%. Hans shook his head slowly. "That's impossible. The humans shouldn't even understand how our engines work, let alone improve them." The humans in question were a team working in what remained of Silicon Valley, now protected by a network of hastily constructed anti-orbital defenses. Through a secure video link, Han could see them, ordinary people in mismatched clothes, some still wearing company badges from tech firms that had pivoted overnight from making smartphones to reverse engineering alien technology. "They don't think like us," said the assistant. "They're not following standard engineering protocols. They're guessing, testing, breaking things apart to see how they work." Han had been assigned to monitor human technological progress, expecting to document their slow, stumbling efforts to understand captured Talori equipment. Instead, he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, a species undergoing technological evolution at a pace that defied all models and predictions. In the first month after the invasion, humans had merely copied Talori designs, creating crude but functional replicas of alien weapons. By the second month, they were modifying those designs. Now in the third month, they were improving them in ways that Talori engineers hadn't considered. "The Council needs to see this," Han said, downloading the data. "They're still treating this like a standard subjugation operation. They don't understand what's happening." The Talori High Council chamber, once a place of measured debate and careful consensus, had become a scene of barely controlled chaos. Reports from the Earth front were delivered hourly, each worse than the last. Senior strategist Pak, once the architect of the invasion, was conspicuously absent, reassigned, according to official statements. Everyone knew this was a euphemism for something more permanent. Counselor Song presided over the emergency session, her usually immaculate scales dulled by stress and lack of sleep. "Engineer Han, explain these findings again. Speak plainly." Han stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the worried faces of the council. "The humans have not only mastered our propulsion technology, but improved it using principles our engineers considered too unstable to implement. They've sacrificed safety margins for performance in ways no Talori designer would approve." "Are you suggesting their engineers are superior to ours?" asked an elder counselor, voice sharp with disbelief. "Not superior. Different," Han replied carefully. "Talori engineers optimize for reliability, efficiency, and safety. Human engineers appear willing to accept significant risks for performance gains. They operate with a recklessness that produces unexpected innovations." He displayed a hologram showing the remains of a human fighter craft that had engaged a Talori patrol. This was originally a primitive atmospheric aircraft. They retrofitted it with components from a damaged Talori scout ship. The integration shouldn't work. It violates 6 different engineering principles, but they somehow compensated for the incompatibilities. Xenobiologist Kim, now elevated to senior advisor after his warnings about human adaptability proved correct, stepped forward. "This matches their evolutionary history. On their planet, the species that survived weren't always the strongest or most efficient. They were the ones most capable of rapid adaptation. It's not just their military technology," Han continued, switching the display to show intercepted communications. "They're broadcasting messages to our recently conquered systems, highlighting instances of Talori oppression and offering alliances." The council chamber fell silent as they watched footage of human representatives speaking directly to camera, their words translated into the languages of a dozen species under Talori control. The messages were simple, but devastating. "You are not alone. Together we can be free." "We're receiving reports of unrest on 7 worlds," Counselor Song admitted. 2 have erupted into open rebellion. The subject species are using human tactics, asymmetric warfare, targeting supply lines rather than engaging our forces directly. "And their industrial capacity?" asked another counselor. Han's expression grew grave. beyond anything we anticipated. They've converted their entire manufacturing infrastructure to war production. Factories that once produced consumer goods now build weapons and ships. Their distributed manufacturing network is nearly impossible to target completely. We destroy one facility, two more appear elsewhere. He displayed images of vast underground complexes where assembly lines stretched for kilometers. This facility was a subterranean transport tunnel 3 weeks ago. Now it produces 50 fighter craft daily. They're using techniques we've never seen. Three-dimensional printing technologies adapted to work with our materials, modular designs that allow rapid reconfiguration. What about the human leadership? Counselor Song asked. Our initial strategy was to eliminate their command structure and create disarray. Kim stepped forward again. That's proven counterproductive. Their decentralized governance means eliminating leaders simply creates martyrs and inspires greater resistance. Their communication networks are remarkably resilient. When we destroy one node, they reroute through others. As the briefing continued, a junior officer entered the chamber, approaching Counselor Song with obvious reluctance. She read the message he delivered, her scales paling visibly. The human ships have breached the defensive perimeter around one of our colony worlds, she announced, her voice barely steady. Not their converted vessels, these are new designs incorporating Talori principles but with modifications our analysts don't fully understand. Han wasn't surprised. He'd seen this coming for weeks, warning anyone who would listen. The humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were planning for what came after. Their engineers weren't just copying Talori technology, they were reimagining it. In his private thoughts, Han had begun to calculate how long the Confederacy could withstand this unexpected turn of events. The numbers were not encouraging. The Talori had started this conflict expecting a brief demonstration of power followed by human submission. Instead, they had awakened something that seasoned military commanders were struggling to comprehend, a species that treated impossible situations as merely difficult problems to solve, that adapted faster than any known civilization in galactic history. As the council debated increasingly desperate countermeasures, Han's communicator chimed. It was a message from his research team. The humans had begun broadcasting into deep space, not just to Confederacy worlds. They were reaching out to species beyond Talori influence, sharing freely the technological innovations they'd developed. The message was clear. The humans weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were offering the galaxy an alternative to Talori dominance. The technological renaissance sparked by necessity was becoming something more, a revolution that threatened to reshape the power structure of known space. And it had all begun with what the Talori had assumed would be a simple subjugation of a primitive world. We didn't start a war, Han murmured to himself as the council argued around him. We awakened a sleeping giant. One Talori year after first contact, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Fleet Admiral Choi stood on the command deck of the defense station orbiting Talori Prime, watching tactical displays with growing dread. Red indicators blinked across the star map, each representing another defeat, another system lost, another evacuation. The human fleet has taken the Vega system, reported his second-in-command, voice tight with controlled panic. That's the third major shipyard lost this month, Choi nodded grimly. He had commanded Talori forces for 3 decades, had overseen 16 successful subjugation campaigns. None of that experience had prepared him for humans. Show me the battle footage, he ordered. The main view screen activated, displaying scenes from the Vega shipyard's final hours. Human vessels swarmed like insects, their formations making no sense to Talori military doctrine. Where Talori ships maintained precise geometric patterns to optimize shield coverage, human ships flew in seemingly chaotic arrangements, changing direction unpredictably, sacrificing efficiency for unpredictability. Their tactics make no sense, Choi muttered, watching as a human cruiser deliberately vented its engine plasma to create a sensor-blinding cloud. No Talori commander would consider such approaches. That's why they're winning, replied his second. We can't predict what they'll do because they don't follow rational combat protocols. The footage showed the moment when the tide of battle turned. Human ships suddenly broke formation, accelerating toward the shipyard's main defense platform. Talori gunners fired desperately, destroying 3 attackers, but the remaining ships pressed on. At the last moment, they released smaller craft. Not missiles, but piloted vessels barely large enough for a single human. "Freeze image," Choi ordered. "What are those?" His tactical officer enlarged the image. "They call them boarding torpedoes, one-way insertion vehicles designed to penetrate our hulls. The pilots know they can't return." "Suicide tactics again," Choi said quietly. "How do they find so many willing to sacrifice themselves?" "They don't see it as sacrifice," came a voice. From behind him, Grand Advisor Kim had entered the command center unannounced. 1 year as the Council's chief human expert had aged him visibly, his scales dulled by stress. "They see it as heroism, as purpose. In their culture, dying for a cause is considered the height of honor." The footage resumed, showing the boarding torpedoes punching through the station's outer hull. Within minutes, the station's defenses began failing as human infiltrators seized control of key systems. The shipyard fell 6 hours later. "It's not just their willingness to die," Kim continued. "It's their adaptability. Look at those ships. They've taken our propulsion technology and modified it in ways our engineers considered too dangerous to implement." Choi nodded slowly. The human vessels moved faster than equivalent Talori ships, their energy signatures running hotter. "They've sacrificed safety for performance." "They do that with everything," Kim said. "Where we optimize for reliability and sustainability, they optimize for immediate advantage. It's a different evolutionary approach, one that's proving devastatingly effective in warfare." An alert sounded, drawing their attention to a strategic display showing the wider galactic theater. 3 former Talori vassal species had launched simultaneous uprisings, coordinating their attacks with approaching human fleets. The Moro, the Belzari, and the Xindi, Choi identified them. "All species we subjugated within the last century." "All inspired by human propaganda broadcasts," Kim added. "The humans aren't just fighting us, they're offering an alternative vision of galactic governance. Equality, cooperation, mutual defense." Choi's expression hardened. "Pretty words from a species that's proved itself more violent than any we've encountered." "That's where you're wrong," Kim replied. "Humans aren't inherently more violent, they're more protective. There's a crucial difference. They fight ferociously when threatened but show remarkable restraint in victory." He switched the display to show footage from planets where humans had driven out Talori forces. Instead of the expected reprisals against Talori civilians and collaborators, the scenes showed human medical teams treating wounded Talori, distribution of food supplies to all species, establishment of local governance councils. "This is their true weapon," Kim said softly. "Not their improvised technology or their unconventional tactics, but this, their ability to offer something better than our rule." Before Choi could respond, an emergency alert blared throughout the command center. The tactical display updated, showing a massive human fleet emerging from faster-than-light travel near Proxima Centauri, the gateway system to Talori core territories. "How did they get there so quickly?" Choi demanded. "Our intelligence said their fleet was concentrated in the Orion sector." "Those were decoys," his tactical officer replied, voice hollow with shock. "Automated ships broadcasting false signatures. The main fleet must have traveled through the Medusa Nebula, a route we considered impassable due to radiation levels." Choi stared at the display in disbelief. The Medusa Nebula was a navigational nightmare, its radiation fields capable of destroying ship systems and killing crew. No Talori commander would risk it. "They modified their shields," Kim guessed. "Probably sacrificed other systems to reinforce radiation protection, a calculated risk that paid off." The Battle of Proxima Centauri unfolded over the next 12 hours. Choi watched with professional detachment as the largest fleet action in Talori history played out on his screens. The outcome was never really in doubt. Human ships demonstrated a new weapon, some kind of field generator that disrupted the quantum drives powering Talori vessels, leaving them drifting and defenseless. "How?" Choi whispered, as he watched Talori dreadnoughts, the pride of their fleet, power down one after another. Those drives were thought to be invulnerable. They studied the captured ships, Kim replied, found a vulnerability our engineers overlooked because no one would think to look for it. Quantum entanglement can be disrupted by precisely calibrated graviton pulses, a theoretical possibility our scientists dismissed as impractical. By dawn, it was over. The Proxima Defense Fleet, 30% of the Confederacy's total military strength, had been neutralized without being destroyed. Human ships were methodically boarding the disabled vessels, evacuating Talori crew into medical transports. In the aftermath, Choi found himself in an emergency council session. The mood was somber. The debate no longer about whether to continue fighting but how to approach the inevitable surrender negotiations. The humans are 3 jumps from our homeworld, Counselor Song stated flatly. Our remaining forces cannot stop them. We must seek terms while we still can. Grand Advisor Kim stepped forward. I've studied human history extensively. Their terms will be more merciful than ours would be in their position. They don't seek extermination or even subjugation. They want partnership, albeit on their terms. And we should believe this? Asked an elder counselor skeptically. Look at their actions, not their words, Kim replied. On every world they've liberated, they've established local governance, provided aid, rebuilt infrastructure. They're not conquerors, they're liberators. And that, more than their weapons, is why we've lost. As the council debated, Choi stood by the window gazing up at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were approaching. Vessels built with technology his people had developed over centuries, improved upon by a species that had barely reached their own moon when this conflict began. The greatest military mind of the Talori Confederacy finally understood their fundamental error. They had evaluated humans solely by their technological development, dismissing them as primitives. They had failed to recognize that technology was just a tool, and humans were masters at adapting tools to their needs. We didn't lose to their weapons, he murmured to himself. We lost to their will. The Talori homeworld shimmered like a jewel against the blackness of space, its ring system casting delicate shadows across azure oceans and emerald continents. For millennia, the planet had been the unchallenged center of galactic power, its inhabitants secure in their technological and military superiority. Now the orbital space around that world bristled with ships bearing the insignia of a species unknown to the galaxy just 1 year earlier. Human vessels hung in precise formation, their designs a strange hybrid of Earth engineering and repurposed Talori technology. Alongside them flew ships from the Moro, the Belzari, and a dozen other formerly subjugated species that had joined the human-led alliance. The assembled fleet had enough firepower to reduce the Talori homeworld to molten slag within hours. They did not fire a single shot. In the Grand Hall of Consultation, the most sacred political space in Talori civilization, Counselor Song stood before representatives of 27 species. The room had been designed to intimidate foreign dignitaries, with Talori council members seated on elevated platforms looking down at visitors. Today, by human insistence, everyone sat at the same level around a circular table, a physical representation of the new reality. For over 800 years, the Talori Confederacy has maintained peace and order across 17 star systems. Song began, her voice steady despite the historic humiliation of the moment. We have shared technology, established trade routes, and protected developing worlds from external threats. A human representative, not a military commander but a civilian diplomat, nodded politely. And extracted resources, conscripted labor, and suppressed cultural development that didn't align with Talori interests, she added, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Song's scales rippled slightly, the Talori equivalent of a sigh. Our methods were harsh by your standards, but they were effective. Until they weren't, observed a Moro delegate, his tentacles gesturing at the document projected above the table. I believe we're here to discuss terms, not debate history. The terms displayed before them were unlike any surrender document in Talori history. There was no demand for unconditional capitulation, no provisions for occupation forces or reparations to the victors. Instead, the document outlined the formation of a new galactic cooperative, with representatives from all species, Talori included. "You could have destroyed us," Song said quietly to the human diplomat. "Your fleet surrounds our world. Our military is shattered." "Why these terms?" The human's expression remained calm. "Because that's your way, not ours. We fight to protect, not to conquer. But the damage we caused was considerable," the human acknowledged. "Earth will bear the scars for generations. But what purpose would destroying your civilization serve? Vengeance isn't justice. We want partners, not vassals." Grandy. Advisor Kim, seated beside Song, studied the human with fascination. In the year since first contact, he had immersed himself in human culture, history, and psychology, trying to understand the species that had upended galactic order. Even now, they surprised him. The document specified complete dismantling of the Confederacy's offensive military capacity, open technology sharing between all member species, and reparations to formerly subjugated worlds. But it also included provisions for Talori cultural preservation, economic integration, and full voting rights in the new Galactic Assembly. "You're offering us equality," Kim said, disbelief evident in his voice. "After what we did." The human nodded. "Individual Talori who committed war crimes will face justice, but we don't believe in collective punishment. Your people have valuable knowledge, art, philosophy, things the galaxy would be poorer without." As the negotiations proceeded, Kim found himself increasingly drawn into conversation with the human representatives. During a recess, he approached a human general who had commanded the fleet at Proxima Centauri. "There's something I still don't understand," Kim admitted. "How did your species advance so quickly? You went from primitive chemical rockets to improved versions of our quantum drives in less than a year." The general smiled slightly. "Necessity. You attacked our home. We had nowhere to retreat. You left us no choice but to win." "But the technological leap was already in our nature," the general explained. "Throughout our history, war has accelerated human innovation. Tragic, but true. What might have taken decades in peacetime took months when our survival depended on it." Kim nodded slowly. "And now? What happens when the immediate threat is gone?" "That's the true test," the general acknowledged. "War focuses human ingenuity. Peace challenges us to maintain that focus without the stimulus of danger. That's why this cooperative is so important. It gives us a common purpose beyond conflict." When the negotiations concluded 3 days later, the galaxy had been transformed. The Talori Confederacy, for 8 centuries the dominant power in known space, ceased to exist. In its place stood the Galactic Cooperative, a coalition of equals bound by mutual defense pacts and technology-sharing agreements. In historical archives across the galaxy, the Talori decision to attack Earth became the textbook example of strategic catastrophe, remembered as the greatest blunder. Military academies studied it as the classic case of underestimating an adversary based on technological development rather than adaptive capacity. 5 years after the formation of the cooperative, Kim found himself on Earth, serving as the Talori, ambassador to the planet his people had once attempted to conquer. The scars of war remained visible, craters where cities had once stood, memorial gardens commemorating the millions lost. But alongside them rose new structures, research centers, diplomatic enclaves, transportation hubs linking Earth to the wider galactic community. Walking through a rebuilt district of what humans called New Delhi, Kim marveled at the resilience on display. Buildings incorporated elements of Talori, Moro, and human design in a harmonious blend that would have been unimaginable under Confederacy rule, where Talori architectural principles were imposed on all worlds. A group of school children passed by human youngsters on a field trip to the Galactic Cultural Center. One small girl noticed Kim and approached without fear. "Are you from space?" she asked with the directness unique to human children. Kim bent down to her level. "Yes, I come from a planet called Talori Prime. My grandfather fought in the war," she said matter-of-factly. "He has a robot arm now." Kim felt the familiar pang of guilt that all Talori experienced in such moments. "I'm sorry for what my people did." The girl shrugged. "That's okay. My grandfather says we're all neighbors now, and neighbors forgive each other." As the children moved on, Kim reflected on the profound shift that had occurred in just 5 years. Under Talori rule, the galaxy had been stable but stagnant, with innovation controlled and cultural exchange limited. Now ideas flowed freely between worlds. Scientific advancement had accelerated beyond anything in recorded history, as species combined their knowledge rather than hoarding it. Humans had established diplomatic and trade relations with 30 new species beyond the former Confederacy borders. They had created institutes dedicated to peaceful technological advancement, environmental restoration, and cultural preservation. Most remarkably, they had brought more stability to the galaxy than had existed under Talori rule. Not through force, but through cooperation. In his regular reports back to Talori Prime, Kim often reflected on the irony. His people had attacked. Earth-fearing human potential would someday threaten Talori dominance. In doing so, they had accelerated human development by centuries and brought about the very future they had sought to prevent. The final sentence of his most recent report summed up the lesson that echoed across the stars. "We thought their physical fragility indicated weakness. We failed to understand that species who evolved on dangerous worlds don't fear conflict. They master it. Starting a war with humans wasn't just a blunder. It was the moment that transformed the galaxy."